Hello, 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 hello. How's everybody doing? A little bit sleepy. I know it's the morning. I know it's a little bit louder out there, but how's everyone doing? Come on, we're here to grill the media. You've got to be a little bit more juice than that. So this session here is all about the media. Let's face it, the media has influence. It is simply not possible to be in the space of media and not have an impact on how the world sees climate impact, or indeed does not see climate impact. During this session, we're going to be doing 3 different sessions. First, we're going to be having a keynote discussion, followed by a panel, followed by a fireside chat, where we'll be diving into what the journalistic charter should look like. So are we ready to get going, people? Maybe not, maybe not. I'm going to make up that you are. So our first speaker today, we're doing a keynote speech, has been traveling the world for, wait for it, 2 years, going to 26 different countries, exploring different approaches to the fight against climate change, looking at not only the impacts that climate change has, but also looking at some of the stories of hope and inspiration where we can see solutions. In his book, Race for Tomorrow, he takes us on a journey through the changing of our planet, whilst exploring the stark reality that climate change has been having on the world. Here to give us some insights into exactly that, please give a warm Change Now round of applause for Simon Mundy.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Hello, everyone, and it's a real privilege to be opening this session with a few words about this book, Race for Tomorrow, and some of the extraordinary human stories that I was able to include in it. So, my background is as a foreign correspondent for the Financial Times, working in South Africa, South Korea, and India. And it was during my time as a foreign correspondent that I was struck by how the climate crisis and the changes that it has sent cascading through the world economy is simply the biggest story of our century, the biggest story for any journalist to be able to cover. And yet, to many people, this is a story that is very difficult to engage with. It can feel overwhelming, it's very politicized, it can feel depressing, there's so much data to get to grips with. And yet, within this, there are some amazing and compelling human stories. And those are the stories that I set out to tell in this book with a real, I suppose, old-fashioned approach to journalism, getting on the ground, speaking to people, hearing their stories, and reporting them. It was a journey that ended up taking me 2 years through 26 countries on 6 different continents. I encountered some extraordinary people during that time, and I'd like to share just a few of their stories with you here today. So I'll share some of the photos that I took during my journey, and there are many more available on my website, simonmundy.com. This photograph, when people ask me which of the countries I went to was the most memorable, most extraordinary, I find myself talking about Mongolia. This gentleman here is a herder called Gombo. He lives in Uvs in the northwest of Mongolia, and he's been hit by one of the more surprising and counterintuitive climate impacts, which is extreme winter conditions. Herders in Mongolia have been hit by what they call dzud, which is extremely heavy snowfall, followed by extreme fluctuations in temperature that have been devastating their herds. This is linked to the accelerating melting of ice in the Arctic, which has been disrupting the movement of moisture and heat energy across the northern hemisphere. And we've seen similar instances of extreme weather in Europe and, of course, in Texas a couple of years ago. Climate change is a complicated thing, and we're playing a very dangerous game with our global climate system. In Ethiopia, I met another set of herders who are facing another very different set of challenges, again linked with climate change. Ali Mohammed on the left has seen his herd devastated by drought, followed by locust infestations, again, all linked with changes to the regional climate. Gandli Galagosa here in the Solomon Islands, that's in the South Pacific to the far east of Australia. He is standing here on the site of his house, his former house, which has now been inundated by rising sea levels that have been rising at a pace even faster than the global average. This is a sign of what could await people in low-lying areas all over the world. In Bangladesh, you'll have heard lots about how Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable countries. People often talk about how parts of Bangladesh will end up being flooded and underwater, and this is true. But there is already an even more powerful change underway, which is the permeation of salty water into farmland across much of southwestern Bangladesh, where for centuries people have lived on rice farming. Now the earth is getting too salty, too saline to grow rice, and people like Morgina, who you see on the right here, who used to have a stable existence in a village in southwestern Bangladesh, now finds herself with her family in a slum area of Dhaka, which is an incredibly overcrowded city that's getting more and more overcrowded by the day. And all of these people, you might have noticed, have one thing in common. Well, two things, really, which is, for one thing, they are among the most vulnerable in terms of their economic resources. They're the least well-placed to resist these changes that they're being hit with. And at the same time, they have contributed the least to the global climate crisis. Per capita carbon emissions per year in the US is about 16 tons per person per year. In Ethiopia, 0.1, 160 times smaller. And so this comes down to a question of the two words that you see written on the placard in this photograph, which I took of Joanna Sustento, a young Filipina climate activist, when she was holding a one-woman protest outside the Philippines headquarters of Shell, the oil company, in Manila. And she was arrested by the police and taken away. Fortunately, she was later released. And Joanna lost almost her entire family to the catastrophe of Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. They were among more than 6,000 people who were killed by that disaster in the Philippines. And the reason why she was protesting outside the office of Shell was because in the previous year, Shell had paid out more money in dividends to its shareholders than any other company in the world, $20 billion, much more than Apple, which was in second place. And its chief executive, Ben van Beurden, earned $62,000 per day. And the only reason why it was possible for Shell to give so much money to its shareholders and to its chief executive was because Shell has not been paying the cost of the pollution that is caused by the use of its products. That cost has been paid by people like Joanna's family and many other vulnerable communities all over the world. But it's too convenient, I think, to just point the finger at Shell, the producers and retailers of the fossil fuel products on which our economy relies. We also, as consumers of fossil fuels and of goods and services produced using fossil fuels, we are part of that system too. And what we have to talk about in response to this is a fundamental change in the way that the global economy works. And what's encouraging is that all over the world, everyone I spoke to realized that this has to happen, and moreover, it's already starting to happen. Even this guy. So this is Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman. He's the son of the King of Saudi Arabia and the Energy Minister of Saudi Arabia, which makes him effectively the most powerful person in the global energy business. And we had an interview which ended up lasting 3 hours because he was so keen to talk about the potential that Saudi Arabia saw in green energy. Now, I'm skeptical about that. I think we should all be skeptical about it. Saudi Arabia is by far the biggest exporter of oil today. Its economy rests upon that, and Prince Abdulaziz was open about the fact that Saudi Arabia intends to keep producing a lot of oil for a long time to come. But nonetheless, it was very interesting that he was so eager to say, we are not a fossil fuel dinosaur. We are getting on board with the clean energy revolution. We are going to be a leader in green hydrogen and solar. Whatever we think about Saudi Arabia and its energy policy, it's a really important sign that even Saudi Arabia now feels that publicly it has to talk very loudly about these things. That was not the case some years ago, and it's a sign of how fast momentum is starting to gather. That momentum is still not growing fast enough. We are still way off track from where we need to be in the decarbonization of the global economy. But I was excited by some of the innovations I saw being developed by a new generation of startup companies all over the world. I took this photo with my drone in Iceland. This is a place called Hellisheiði. It's Iceland's largest geothermal power plant. And this is where Edda Aradottir and her team are developing a project that's quite unlike any other I've seen in the world. She is the chief executive of an Icelandic company called Carbfix, and they have a joint venture with a Zurich-based company called Climeworks. And what they've built together is a system to suck carbon dioxide from the air, dissolve it in water, pump it underground, where it reacts with the Icelandic bedrock to form limestone. So whereas for hundreds of years we've been taking solid fossil fuels from under the ground, burning them, turning them into gas, which is heating our atmosphere, this is putting that into reverse. You take the gas, you turn it into a solid underground. So this seems exciting, but there's a hugely long way to go. They will need to rely on the carbon offset market, which at the moment is dominated by products that don't remove carbon from the atmosphere, but avoid emissions or reduce emissions. And the scale of what needs to happen is enormous. Each of the Climeworks machines removes 50 tons of carbon dioxide per year from the atmosphere. Global greenhouse gas emissions are more than 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And I said this to Christoph Gebald, who's one of Edda's partners. He's the co-chief executive of Climeworks. I said, you would need 1 billion of your machines to offset all of humanity's emissions. And he said, well, look, for one thing, we hope emissions will come down. Secondly, realistically, we don't expect to do it all on our own. But then he said a third thing, which I found really interesting. He said, Simon, do you realize that we as humanity make almost 100 million passenger cars every year? So if we wanted to make 100 million of our machines, which are actually smaller than a car and easier to make, it's not impossible. And that was just a sign for me of the scale and ambition with which some of these entrepreneurs are thinking. And if we as humanity become more ambitious as a whole, raise our sights, we could move an awful lot faster than we're doing. I met startups all over the world who are showing similar levels of ambitions. Didier Toubia is the chief executive of Aleph Farms, based in Israel, and they have created a way to grow steaks using bioreactors from cow cells. Now, this might sound pretty creepy and disgusting to many people. I'm sure a lot of people would not be comfortable with the idea of eating meat that comes from a bioreactor, but the fact is, cattle farming today, beef production, is one of the single biggest drivers of the climate crisis. It's driving deforestation, as I saw for myself in the Amazon rainforest, and the billion-plus cattle in the world today are an enormous source of methane. And these guys are among a growing number of alternative protein manufacturers who are trying to give consumers who love the taste of meat a planet-friendly way of doing that. In China, I met a really extraordinary mix of entrepreneurs. He Xiaopeng behind me, he became a billionaire in the Chinese e-commerce and digital economy. He developed the country's most popular web browser. He then went to work for Alibaba after selling his company to it. But he is one of a growing number of ambitious, high-powered Chinese entrepreneurs who reckon the place to be if you want to make billions in China is clean tech. So that's why he's now running an electric car company, XPeng Motors, one of China's biggest and most successful electric car companies. Now, a lot of people say with some justification, look, China is a huge part of the climate problem, and obviously that's true. China accounts for about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's by far the single biggest emitter. But it is also true to say that China has a leading role in many of the key areas of the clean tech economy. Xiaopeng and other entrepreneurs that I met were absolutely convinced that this is the way to really align your business with the long-term strategy of the Chinese Communist Party, is to go for leadership in clean tech. And this is something where Europe and the US really have to make sure that they compete, because China is in a very, very strong position in many of these markets. And in the US, I saw a very different companies that were very impressive in a very different sort of way. Among them was the nuclear physicist Bob Mumgard, who you see in this photo. And what he's posing with in this photo is actually a very old nuclear fusion reactor. It was built in the 1980s, and when it was switched on, this was the hottest point in the entire solar system, 100 million degrees Celsius, 5 times hotter than the center of the sun. But the problem is that so far no one has been able to build and develop a fusion reactor that can produce more energy than it consumes. So not much use as a working power station. Bob, since we met, has now raised $2 billion to build what he says will be the first working prototype of a fusion reactor that could deliver reliable, safe, zero-carbon, non-radioactive power, non-long-term radioactive power, which could transform the global energy sector. So just a few of the entrepreneurs who are really putting in place the building blocks for what could be a much cleaner world economy, and that's something which I think a lot of people underestimate. But I want to finish with the story of my trip to the Democratic Republic of Congo. I took this photograph in a place called Kolwezi, which is in the southeast of the country, and it's at the center of an extraordinary boom in mining for cobalt. I think I'm the only foreign journalist who's been stupid enough to go down inside an illegal Congolese cobalt mine, which is a scary place to be. But there are people like Mangovo, who you see here, holding cobalt in his hands. He spends all day, every day, down there. And there have also, sadly, been children like Letitia, who you see here, who have been working at mining sites in Congo. Now, and she's fortunately now training to be a seamstress with the help of an NGO, but many other children are still working in these places. And I want to finish with this story, because cobalt, for those who aren't familiar, cobalt is at the center of the clean tech economy. It's an essential ingredient in most electric car batteries today. And at the moment, most of the world's supply comes from Congo. And this raises some important questions for us. Some people might take a childish approach and say, see, let's not bother with electric vehicles, it's just as bad. Well, that's stupid. That's not the right answer. We need electric vehicles. The correct answer to this problem is to say, look, we have an opportunity here to do things differently. We have no choice but to move to cleaner forms of energy. That is being forced upon us by the climate catastrophe that we're heading towards. But it's not enough just to say, okay, we'll go for zero carbon options and just leave it at that. This is going to be difficult. This is going to be challenging. The answers are not always easy and obvious. But the beautiful thing is that we have an opportunity, as we are forced to move towards a lower carbon economy. We have an opportunity to build an economy that is truly better and fairer in every way for people like Letitia and billions of others in the global south, as well as lower carbon. So I'd like to leave it there. These are just a few of the stories that you'll find in the book. If you'd like to read more, it's on sale at the bookshop by the Blue Bubble, and I'll be signing copies there at 12 o'clock. I'll hope to see many of you there. Thank you.
Simon Mundy. How interesting was that? Lots of different examples of things that are being done, really bringing to life what the impact of climate change is as well. And it's something that we do need to see. Diving a little bit deeper, we're now about to have a panel discussion where ask questions of various different media outlets to establish the sorts of activities that they're doing right now, but also what their role should be, because let's face it, media has impact and influence. Are we ready for this panel discussion? Yes, you're getting better at this. I like it. You've only had 2 rounds to practice, so I get it's new, but I'm really appreciating it. So, joining me on stage, we have the commissioning editor at CNN, Tom McGowan. We'll have the senior correspondent from Time, Justin Warland, CEO of Le Parisien, Sophie Gormala, as well as the editor-in-chief Meteo Climate from France Television, Audrey Sandrine. Please come and join me here on the stage. Hello, hello. Don't look so nervous. I promise I won't grill you too much. Let's do this. We'll start with a very easy question. When we think of broadcasters and media outlets, we see big names and we just have no idea what individuals do. And a lot of the organizations you work for are vast. So to give us some context, Sophie, maybe can you just let us know a little bit more about what your actual role is within France Television?
Thank you. So Le Parisien is a large newspaper dealing with local, national, international information. And we decided to reinforce the cover of climate changes 2 years ago. And we create sections, which is called Mater, My Earth in English. Every week, we are dealing with news about what's going on this topic. And the mission we give to us is to give people the keys to improve their eco-responsibility in their daily life. So that's what we're aiming for. We have a very large target groups, so we are aiming at improving the awareness of climate changes to people who are not very keen on that usually. I mean, they are not all young, so they have to be taught, and this is what we are doing. I will develop more if you want, but I'm giving
Thank you, that's really helpful. So really looking at the weather side of things in particular and integrating more communication there.
Yes, the weather side, but also how you can improve your consumptions to be more eco-responsible, to waste less food, to eat better food. I mean, there is a lot of areas in your daily life that we try to explain to our readers in the newspaper, but also on the websites. And we have a different approach when we are dealing on the social network, where we are targeting a younger audience, which is more used and more familiar to this topic. So we have different approach according to the media we are using.
Brilliant. We'll dive into some of the approaches as well in a little bit. Audrey, can you tell us a little bit about where your role kind of fits in, so we have some context before we dive into the detail?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So I work for France Télévisions, which is the French public service broadcast. And I am not the CEO, contrary to Sophie. I'm editor of a new program, which is a weather and climate program. We used to have just the weather before at France Télévisions, so weather forecast every day. And now we've upgraded it with climate context every day. So every evening, our viewers get the necessary, very necessary climate context to how the sky looks. Now you understand maybe why and how the sky is affected by climate change. And it's very new. It's a newborn program. It's been 2 months. It's 2 months old. So
Okay,
we're very
so
tired.
brand fresh, new, off the press. Just in Time is a brand that we're very familiar with. It's huge. Where do you sit in? Where do you fit in?
Well, yeah, it is a big brand. I'm a reporter, basically. I'm out looking for stories, writing stories, identifying ways to share information about climate change out in the field. The way I think about it is I'm often looking for 30,000-foot stories that will explain lots of different connections to people, sort of going beyond the daily news. In addition to that, I just launched a column/newsletter looking at the world of business, finance, and climate, how these things are intersecting. And the idea is that we're going to reach out to people, not necessarily the people in this room who are perhaps familiar with those connections, but to people who are just sort of dipping their toes into this. And so that's a sort of a separate segment of my job, but really looking at all things climate and writing about them for Time.
Brilliant. CNN, also a name that I think everybody in the room recognizes. Tom, where do you fit in? Because when I think CNN, I may be thinking very different from the role you actually do.
Yeah, I think you're right. Good morning, everyone. I head up the London features team for CNN International. We work across a variety of non-news projects, primary of which is Call to Earth, which is our flagship sustainability initiative. And where Justin talks about the 30,000-foot approach, we kind of try to go around the world finding people who are solutions focused in a local community, focused on a specific issue or specific animal or specific area.
Thank you so much for sharing. We already know that media has influence. But when we think of the role of broadcasters and the role of media in terms of accessing stories, Justin, I'm going to start with you. What should it be? Because I'm sure everybody in this room has got some idea of what the media and what broadcasters and what journalists like yourself should be doing in relation to reporting climate change and making the stories around climate more accessible. But in your opinion, where do you think the media is supposed to fit in?
Well, there's a few things. First, I would say the media has to play the role of record keeper, the role of holding people accountable. That's, I think, things that we're sort of comfortable doing and have done for some time. I think the thing where there's room for growth, and I think we have seen growth, I mean, we're hearing about it on this stage, is finding ways to meet people where they are, finding ways to tell stories in a way that's beyond just the sort of, well, this is the latest study in the big journal, or this is the latest data about parts per million, to really say, how is climate impacting your life? How is climate impacting your job? How is climate impacting, the things that you pay attention to already? And just it requires sort of exercising a different muscle for journalists, and I think we're sort of figuring that out.
Sophie, would you agree? I mean, Le Parisien, big outlet. What is the role of media?
I think, I agree with what you're saying. I think our first role is to inform people with data and a scientific approach, but making it very accessible to a broad target groups. And if you take the headlines of the Le Parisien this morning, it's about the climate skeptic on the weather. And there is a story that we are telling in the Parisien this morning about all the bashing on the Twitter to the weather, people who are presenting the weather on TV, because they think, no, it's not that warm. So, there is no climate change, there is no global warming, so what you're saying is completely wrong. So this is what we are explaining and put it on the front page of the newspaper this morning. That's a way of bringing awareness, I think, and this is the role of Le Parisien, is to take a subject and to make it simple and accessible and close to people's lives so that they can think, they can change in something in their day-to-day ways of living.
I love the idea that you're putting stories on the front page, because I think that's quite important. And yet not everybody's necessarily engaging with the front page of a newspaper. So Audrey, with the weather, how do you even begin to use that as a platform to communicate climate change and climate impacts? And where does that part of media fall in, especially when it's public owned?
So what happens when the weather broadcast basically is a tradition. Like it's something that people watch in the evening with family, probably, maybe while eating. So it's really a tradition that we didn't want to. We wanted to change it, but upgrade it rather than destroy it. So it was really the idea of, okay, what's the necessary context that we need to add to this weather broadcast, forecast in the context of climate change. So I think that doing the weather today without talking about climate change is like covering the stock market in 2008 without talking about the financial crisis. It really is something that shouldn't make sense today because the weather is really impacted heavily by climate change. So it's sort of a natural evolution for the weather forecast. And I really appreciate in your question the accessibility idea. The weather forecast is a very popular rendezvous for our viewers. And so to inject some climate inside that kind of rendezvous is super important because it's a place that is super accessible for people. And I think we need to do explanatory journalism in that kind of spaces where we have a lot of viewers who are able to get some understanding and maybe, if they have understanding, act on their own. But then our mission is really to let them understand and so explain things.
I think it is important to help people understand and explain, but I'm going to get almost a little bit more to the heart of things. There will be people who are saying the media has so much influence and they simply aren't doing enough. We're not moving fast enough. We're not making big enough impact. This is something that's impacting the whole of the world, and yet it feels as if we're moving too slowly. Sophie, what would you say to that? What would you say to people who are saying, why aren't we moving faster?
I think we're moving, maybe not as fast as everybody wants, but on the last GIEC report, the media coverage on climate change is doubled in the last 4 years. So we are doing more and more. Never enough, that's for sure. But I think we are changing little by little the ways that people think about that. And a survey we did in December showed that people, for example, on meat consumption, they have moved. And now 70% of people are aware that meat consumption has an influence on the climate change. So, and that's something I think the role of media is giving little things, keys to actions for people. So never fast enough, but I mean, we improve it and we do it a lot it's more present now in the newsroom than it has never been even a year ago. I mean, we do more and more. We train our journalists on these climate changes. I mean, we have more people dealing with that on every topic, not just on environments, but we try to put environment information on everything, on sport. We have the Olympic game in France in a year. I mean, every topic is about the green, eco-responsible Olympic game in France. So we're dealing with that, and we try to do it more and more. So it's never enough, but we know that, and we're pushing hard.
Never enough, but you're pushing hard. Tom, what are your thoughts when somebody says, too slow, just too slow?
It's interesting because, I mean, with CNN, we've got Ted Turner as a founder who, way back in the 80s, was a bit of a pioneer in kind of media conservation. We have a dedicated climate unit which sits across all bureaus, and I know that the climate crisis is an editorial pillar. I think sometimes when we talk about moving too slow, I think the coverage is there. It's maybe, are we getting it right? Are we engaging people enough? I think we've all just come off the back of a pandemic, right? Where at the start of it, we're all glued to government updates, wanting the latest news, and then sooner or later you have to start pulling away. It's too worrisome, it's too anxiety-inducing. I think the climate conversation is similar. So if you can't alarm people, if you can't stum them into action, you have to inspire them. And I think that's where approaches like we take with Call to Earth, where you go into communities and you go to places and you meet people who are making a difference, if only on a small level. Those stories of kind of hope and inspiration, told beautifully with beautiful pictures, is one way of kind of engaging people. But it's a huge issue. It's the biggest issue of our time. It's going to take thousands of journalists and thousands of approaches and different ways to engage people, I think.
Justin, you've been in journalism for ages. Do you agree that maybe it's the approach? Is it that the approach we're taking isn't designed right now for us to be able to move at the pace that the public is expecting us, or is it something else? Well, why can't we move faster?
Well, I would first agree that we're doing a lot, and it also is not fast enough. That is the case with much when it comes to climate change. But I would say I do think there is this sort of fundamental challenge that journalists, that media outlets have faced, given the way that we tend to structure our coverage with beat systems where reporters are focused narrowly on an issue. Say, if you're focused on stock market, as we said earlier. You're thinking about the things that your sources are talking to, and those sources are thinking about the same things over and over, and they don't necessarily think about the bigger picture of climate change. So the question becomes, how do you get people across society to start grappling with climate if the sources aren't doing that? And so one way is to try to hire a bunch of climate reporters who can cover each other facet of things, or you can try to find a way to get reporters who are focused on other things to understand climate and incorporate that into their coverage, both of which are pretty gargantuan tasks that require thinking about and organizing journalism differently. The reality is we're probably going to need a little bit of both, but I think that's a question that we're sort of sifting through.
And one place where I think you are getting it right, where things are moving, Audrey, is the way that you're using the news. We can using the weather. We can say that people, and Tom kind of alluded to it, over the pandemic, all we heard was stories of doom, or at least it felt like that people have become quite disenfranchised by hearing stories that feel quite heavy. We hear about anxiety levels going up, whereas people just don't want to handle those sorts of stories. How do we tell stories around climate in a way that's going to get people to move faster? How do you integrate that into the weather?
A good question. I think for us it's really 101 in terms of, okay, there's not enough rain in the south of France. It's something that impacts the daily life of people already. It's not something that we add to their daily life. It's already there. So it's first explaining to them why is that happening and how this can be mitigated. And so the second part is really mitigation. I think it's very important. So first, doing good explanatory journalism with the help of scientists, we really do that. And we do that in a way that is listening to the audience's question. We have a sort of operation called On vous répond, which means we answer you. And so viewers can scan a QR code every night and ask their question on the website, which allows us to understand what they want to understand. And we really base our coverage on the question of the audience, which is a really, really good compass to where they are at, what they need to understand. And from that, based on that, we go see scientists, and they help us answering those questions. Often it's themselves answering the question, the climate scientists. And it really helps us out not being super anxiety-inducing, for example. And when you've done the explanatory part, then you can switch to, okay, what are the so-called solutions? I'm not saying there's one big solution, but rather trying to show people that there are ways to mitigate with the climate crisis.
I like that you're listening. I think there's one thing to be in a bubble and say, well, let's sit down together and work out what to say. It's another thing to say, well, let's just ask the public who are engaging with these outlets anyway, what do you want to know? How can we tell the story better? Audrey, for you, what do you think needs to change about the way stories are told such that it creates the impact that we need? It's not just about telling stories, it's about providing, you've mentioned earlier, providing great quality information, but how do we tell them so people want to listen?
I think it's also about telling positive story and not just telling what's going on, which is, every time we do disaster story, we know the audience is not very good. And people will prefer to have positive stories. They prefer to have also people to embody the stories, and that's we have a video series, for example, which is called Food Checking, about consumptions, and we have a journalist with explaining what is good, what is not good when you buy, for example, mustard in a supermarket, how you should look on the label. I mean, this kind of thing is working well, and we are very strong on that. Every time you do less of that, you are more on the bad things, which you need to tell as well. I mean, I'm saying that you shouldn't, but I think you should find a way that will be close to people so that they can think they can act and they can do something that will limit, I think, eco-anxiety.
So positive stories that are action orientated, where people can see themselves in it and say, here's something I can do. Tom, I know you've got a very particular way, particularly in your team, that you're looking to tell stories within CNN. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so within Call to Earth, it's mainly a focus on people who are solutions-based, people who are inspiring, people who are trying to make a difference at a micro kind of level with potentially a macro impact. As a natural extension of that, as a recognition of what a huge priority that is for us, we've launched Call to Earth Day, which takes place each November. We're in our 3rd year now, and it involves us going out into the world, into the community, partnering with schools and organizations. I think last year we had, I think it was around 130,000 people take part in 200 events in 82 countries. And we spoke about priorities and resourcing earlier. This is kind of the one non-news event that CNN International treats like a major breaking news story. So for a day, we've got programming in every hour of programming. We have blocks dedicated to Call to Earth. We have reporters across the world in kind of 6, 7 continents. And we kind of put our power behind it and try to create impact, not just on a day, but create a community that can be inspired to go out and take action for the remaining 12 months of the year as well.
Sounds like such a big collaborative space. I think the thing with big problems is they need big answers. And I think, just seeing some of the various different things that people here are doing, it's quite inspiring to say, well, maybe you could take a little bit from that and kind of mix it in. Justin, at Time, you've taken the angle of looking at climate as it pertains to business. And you mentioned earlier we could either go down the route of specifically looking at correspondents and journalists that have a depth of understanding of of climate, or we could start to look more across the board to say when you talk about economics, we should integrate climate. It sounds like that's something that you're looking at Time.
Yeah, absolutely. The origin of the newsletter is really twofold. One, realizing that increasingly a lot of climate action does depend on businesses. There's been big government movement, and now implementation requires the interaction of the private sector. But then two, realizing that there's actually a really underserved group of people in business who are interested in engaging on climate. It's not their entirety of their job, but we figured that there was a niche that wasn't being served, people who want to just get up to speed on sort of the general conversation. And so we created this once-a-week newsletter column, which is designed to touch on the relevant issues in a way that's accessible, so it's not for people who are deeply embedded in this. And I think we launched just maybe 6 weeks ago and have about 250,000 subscribers already. So there is clearly a market, but I think the bigger lesson there is trying to find the little areas and the people who are not being served by the current climate coverage and finding ways, and we've heard about them here, to reach them.
Do you think that the current structure, and we're low on time, I guess, where do you think, where would you love to see the media's impact in, let's say, we're back here at Change Now in 5 years' time, and I'm speaking to you again, so this time we're speaking about some innovations that are popping up. Where would you love to see how the media is involved in climate stories going forward?
I think just to jump in on that, I had a really interesting conversation on Monday with a woman who is an education consultant who specializes in teaching the climate crisis to kids. And she was saying her biggest problem is convincing teachers that it's not the job of the science teacher, it's not the job of the geography teacher to teach kids about the climate crisis. You can do it through arts, you can do it through English, you can do it through literature. And I think it's a similar thing, and I think Justin touched on this earlier, is that actually climate isn't a story, or it can be a beat, but it's actually a backdrop for everything. And it kind of needs to be thread throughout various different areas of coverage. I think that's probably the biggest area to improve.
Go on, Audrey. I could see you like, just so you know, behind you were lots of nodding heads going, I think it's that.
No, I totally agree with that. Like, it's not one beat who should cover climate. It's like every journalist, the business beat reporter should be able to ask the right questions and not be fooled by greenwashing. So I do totally agree with that. I think the question is more about like, who are we trying to reach? We need to do exactly what we're saying, but also I hear often climate scientists saying that right now they feel like they have two kind of audiences: the ones who are really engaged, they know so much already about the climate crisis, and they want to know even more details, and the rest of them who just are, And I think we really need to address that second part also. Like, I think we have products who really are going deep into the details of the climate crisis, but like, how are we putting climate on our leading editorial products, like the things that reach the biggest audience, rather than doing just things for people who are already into this story.
Justin, where would you want to see things go to?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I would add one thing, which is I would love to see maybe someone from a local newspaper or a local broadcaster, because so much of where people consume their information, particularly in the US, but around the world as well, is from their local news, and that is an area where it's been very hard to get people covering climate.
So integrated into local news. And finally, Sophie, where would you want to see things go to?
I agree in everything you're saying, and I would add just if we can engage people to act. And I'm very agree with what you're saying about local news, and we are very much telling stories about local initiative, and there is a lot of things going on. And Le Parisien is also having some challenges that we are doing with local people, and pick up butts, for example, on the Champs-Élysées, and you don't imagine how many butts you have on the Champs-Élysées when you're just doing for 3 hours. It's amazing. So we can engage people to act and make it more positive, make the things more fun and more positive.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much for joining me here today and taking the time to go through my small little grilling. It's been really insightful, and congratulations on all the amazing projects that you're doing. So it's Sophie, Audrey, Justin, and Tom. Warm round of applause. Thank you so much. So we spoke a little bit and touched on a little bit about the framework within journalism, and do we think that it's good enough or capable of being able to support going forward? Do we need journalists who are purely do we need depth or do we need breadth? Well, the next session, we're going to be looking at a new journalistic charter that's designed to support journalism in reporting on climate change better. In order to, joining me, we've got the founder of Ver, Lou Esparguilière, and a journalist from France Television, Sandrine Fedel. Please join me here on stage. These two here is perfect. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm so fabulous. I'm here talking about climate with people in the media. I feel like I'm making huge changes here and shifts. So both of you have been involved with creating a charter to upgrade journalistic practices to tackle the ecological emergency. Can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of this charter? Lou, I'll start with you.
Sure. Can I start by introducing Ver at first, because I'm not sure
Absolutely.
everybody in the room knows the media I work for. So Ver is an independent online media that tries to tell all the news, to look at all the news throughout the prism of climate emergency. It's mostly an online daily newsletter with short and easily understandable articles and a lot of puns, because it's already quite distressing. We don't want to be boring as well. So we have an obsession, is trying to how to reconcile the audience with the media, because I think you noticed there is some sort of a divorce between the general public and its media, and it causes major problems, such as the fact that 40% of the French population don't know there's climate change, and we are responsible for it. And in this respect, the role of media is absolutely crucial. And we tried to write a manifesto, it was a year ago, with journalists, scientists, and people from the civil society. And then we thought, it would be more interesting to try to create a text for the journalists, written by journalists, to try to upgrade our practices throughout all the media. And we, with our colleague Anne-Sophie Novel, gathered a small group of journalists with Sandrine and 30 other journalists from all walks of life and from all kinds of media, like small and big. And we worked for a few months to design this first charter. The name is super long in English, I'm sorry, for upgrading journalist practices to tackle the ecological crisis. It is super long, I'm very sorry about that. Can we display it on screen or?
Not if we don't have an images yet, but we
All
can.
right.
You can find it online. That's for sure. It's in English.
chartjournalismeecologie.com, and then maybe you can look it up while we speak.
Sandrine, can you tell us a little bit about what your involvement was in building this charter, so that we have a little bit more context? Because whilst you work at France Télévisions, you didn't engage with this as an employee of France Télévisions.
No, not at all. Of course, they knew. And hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. The idea was to gather different media and different journalists from different media to work all together, to write this charter. What we saw, what we witnessed, when we were working inside our different media, especially general media like mine, is that most of the time, journalists, when they were not specialized, where they were not, really into, this topic, they often felt lonely, because they didn't really know how to do, what to do, when they had to treat, an example of climate change, when they have to do a report about that. So we thought it was really important to have some guidelines to help them, not to be lost when they have to do a report about heat waves, for example, or any other subject. So this is why we decided to be all together to help them to have some, these guidelines.
So the guidance has 13 key actions outlined in it. We are not going to have time to go through all 13. I think that might be a little bit much. But maybe can you, I'll start with you, Sandrine, can you highlight maybe one or two of the, just to give us a little flavor of the sorts of things that are covered?
Yeah, sure. For example, one of the first article of the Charter is to understand that climate change should not be treated in just one column, because before, and it's been changing, so this is really a very good point. 2 years ago, in big media, when you wanted to have some news about the environment, most of the time it was at the end of the newspaper or at the end of the television news, For example, you had very interesting reports about the disappearance of some insects, or very beautiful images of elephants, but it wasn't through all, the items. And what was really important with the Charter is to make people understand that climate change has consequences on the retirement system, the health system, the way, for example, students, when it's too hot, outside, when it's too warm, it's not possible for students to go and take their exams. So it happens in France 3 years ago, for example, exam had to be postponed. So we know that it's going to be like that more and more in the years to come. So it was really important for us to make people understand that, yes, it has to be treated in every single story in our newspapers or in news stories in television.
So one pillar is really looking beyond it being a single column, but kind of saying it's important to intersperse into all content. Lou, can you give us an example of another one or two of them?
Yeah, well, in order to do that, what you have to do is to train all journalists from all columns to understand at least the basics of climate change and biodiversity loss. And so this is something that we do in some big media outlets, with Imagine 2050 and other. Hi, Laurent. And it is very crucial because we need to have economic journalists or political journalists that are able to ask the proper questions to heads of companies or to political leaders, and they have to get proper answers to their questions. And if they don't understand what's at stake looking at the ecological emergency, well, the general public is not going to understand anything. So this is very crucial. And also one of the key points to me is that we need to be able to decipher and expose greenwashing. the thing is now a part of the industry, the companies are just creating an alternative reality where everything is fine and you can just keep on living your the life just the way you did until now, with some new green products. And this is just not true. And this is really like miles away from what's in the IPCC reports that really tells in like many different fashions that we need to change everything right now in a very radical manner. So when you read that in the news and you get the sense that it's going to be okay and you're going to keep on living like you always done so far, this is a major problem for us all. I mean, what's at stake is like how can we inhabit this planet in a few decades from now?
Can I give more
Of
example?
course.
Yeah. It's written in the charter that we have to be very careful about the images we choose. And if I can give an example, some years ago when we needed to cover, for example, heat waves, at the same time, in the very same news, we were able to show how awful this heat wave was, you know, how it was awful for elderly people, how it was horrible for people who work outside. But a few minutes later, or the day after, we were able to show images where people were so happy to take a drink, for example, outside, because, yeah, it was in some way very pleasant, you know, to be outside and to be able to be outside in the gardens, to be outside and have like showers in some cities. And so at the same time, we were able to show that there were some consequences, but yeah, some people were quite happy with what happened. And now, thanks to trainings, and I think we'll discuss about it a little bit later, thanks to trainings, we don't do it anymore. You know, we don't show people who are so happy because they are climate change. Even if we go on beaches when, for example, you know, this winter we have a big heat wave too, at least we always ask questions about their concerns, whether it's normal or not, and each time people answer that even if they are outside having a drink, they know that this is not a usual situation, that they are worried, and even if they, you know, feel good at this moment, this is something that worry them.
Yeah, so essentially we can't be having mixed messages. On the one hand, climate crisis. On the other hand, sunning on the beach. Which is it? Are we sunning on the beach and we're happy, or are we in a crisis? We need to find a better way of pulling those together. And Lou, you did mention about training. It was something that was brought up as well in the panel before this, that how can we expect journalists to ask the hard questions of politicians and business owners if they simply don't understand the climate crisis? How are they going to dig deeper? So that begs the question, what does great climate training look like? Are there specific criteria or things that should be covered that we can say this is great training for journalists around climate?
I mean, great training involves the 13 key points of the charter. No, I mean, it's really a tool for journalists to identify everything that we as journalists don't do properly and everything that we could do better. Some other key points to me are the fact that we need to take an educational approach. When we say this thing emitted 1 ton of CO2, like, who in this room understands what's 1 ton of CO2? I mean, you guys are experts, I'm not talking about you specifically, but like nobody understands that. And if you don't get an element of comparison or orders of magnitude, I mean, you can talk about CO2 as much as you want, nobody's going to understand anything. So we need to reconsider news as it's another school, you know, it's a second school that you go to throughout your whole life. And we at VER, we really want to give tools to our readers to make them able to understand very complicated news about climate change, biodiversity, and so on.
So it's understanding, having a better understanding, not just of the broad issues around climate, but also communicating that to various different audiences. We heard in the previous panel, some people are, as the people in this room are, they've been in and around climate impact for a long time and they want depth of detail. But it's easy to forget there's a lot of people who simply are trying to understand the basics.
Even some journalists are still trying to understand the basics. So training, I think this is the most powerful tool we have to make people, journalists, and the audience understand how important this climate crisis is. And if I can give you the example of France Télévisions, you know what happened with the trainings, you know, we've been doing for 2 years now. Something like 2 years ago, we, with a small group of environmental journalists, we had one meeting with one author of the IPCC. IPCC in French is GIEC, IPCC. And it was just before the release of their new report, and we wanted to have some background information. And at the end, she said, so this scientist said, this is absolutely horrible the way you treat climate crisis on television. If you want, I come and I do some training. And 2 weeks later, we actually bumped into another IPCC scientist, and she said exactly the same thing. She said, I can come and train you. So we decided, with this small group of journalists, that we were not the ones that needed to be trained, even if we always learn something, So we went to see the direction, of France Télévisions, and we said, we have the most important scientists in France that are telling us that they are willing to come and train all the people. And they say, yeah, of course, this is wonderful. So we did one seminar a year and a half ago, and a second one, and a third one, and a fourth one last week. So now over 120 journalists have come to these seminars and listened to the most important scientists in France. People from the economic department, people from the politics department, and people from the cultural department. So, and there was something, I think you could say a shift happened, not just with this, we have this climate and weather new emission that you saw, you just talked about. But it was one part of the shift that was needed.
People need information in order to do things different and better. Why do you think this charter is so important right now, Lou?
So we released it last September, and since then there's around 2,000 journalists and more than 200 media outlets, journalism schools, like media companies that signed it. So it's actually pretty big, and also there's like some small and some major media outlets. So it has had a very important impact. We released it just after this scorching summer of 2022. So actually it was like everywhere in the news, and I think it was some sort of a turn at that point, and like many major media starting to train the journalists because they realized that they weren't good enough. Simply, they didn't understand most of what was at stake. So I think it's had an impact. I think now it's used in journalism schools. So like all junior journalists now they have a training regarding to the working?
Yes, we're back.
It is. Okay, so as I was saying, this is very important, and I wish all the major media had signed it. But now you see all the media have created their own charter, which is maybe not as good as this charter, but it's good, and like all the small changes in a major media is going to have a lot of impact, I believe. So I think these are good times in the media world in France.
it's a good starting point that helps people, gives people a sense of direction as well in terms of the starting point. That being said, we've talked a lot about it now, so there'll be people who are excited saying this sounds really good, it sounds really interesting, I want to understand more. We've only managed to talk about a handful of the principles. How do people access it? How do they get involved? What's the next step for people who want to take part in the Charter, Lou?
We didn't want to create a charter police and to look at what the signatories would do in their own media, but some people, Citizens Collective, they use it to rub it in the face of some media who signed it and did not respect the principle. There's actually been one of the media who signed a contract with Total Energy to work for them to do their communication, and like people go crazy about that even inside the media, because like, how did we sign the charter and then we work for one of the biggest polluters on earth? So this is really good. Like, you can go online at chartejournalismeecologie.com. You can read it, you can send it to your favorite media or journalist, you can try to make them sign, and you can rub it in their face if they don't respect it when they signed it.
It's not media police, but it might be close enough. Sandrine and Lou, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Please give them a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much.
That does bring us towards the end of this session. If our very first speaker earlier on today, Simon Mundy, he is signing his books actually behind the blue bubble in the bookshop. So if you're interested in getting a copy of the book and diving a little bit deeper into what he spoke about in his talk, you're welcome to do that. My name's been Lavalda Vincenzi. This has been an absolute blast. Enjoy the rest of your day at Change Now, and hopefully I'll see you again in the not too distant future. Take care.